The hassles of working from home, right?
Is that ethical?
When you got to go, you got to go.
Personal morals.
Yeah. Okay. Here you are. How are sound levels?
Good.
Do I sound okay? Okay.
Yep. Yep. It doesn't sound like you're in the toilet.
I just flushed. Sorry.
I've spoken to people and I said, "Where are you?" And they said, "I'm in the toilet." Echo. Right? Yeah. Been there, done that.
No, I'm kind of reminded of a film with Orson Welles called Catch 22. And in that film, you should see it, Ilya, Catch 22.
Yeah.
I think it's based on a novel by Joseph Heller, and
Yeah.
it's a film. I think it's got Alan Arkin in it, I think,
Yep.
but Orson Welles plays like this officer, and he's having a meeting while he's actually on the toilet. So he's actually gets people.
That's where it came from. Yeah. I've seen Catch 22. The scene where I dread to say, but it kind of shocked me was where he was inside the bomber, and he's they're flying along, and he goes to like his friend. I think his friend was saying, "Help me," or something like that. And he goes over, and you just see all his blood pouring out through the uniform. And then he opens the uniform, and it's just gruesome stuff.
Oh yeah, it is. Yeah, that's a gruesome thing. Yeah. But actually, they remade it recently. I think it was a miniseries. With George Clooney, I think may have actually been involved. Yeah, but the one that I kind of remember is the original. I think.
He'll be selling coffee somewhere along the line. But the other scene, which was it was interesting in a way, but still gruesome, was the one where they're swimming to the pontoon and back, and then they're playing on the pontoon, and then the aeroplane comes, it's not a bomber, but just this normal, like, smaller aeroplane comes flying through and just takes the guy that was standing up on the pontoon, takes half of him off.
You remember that scene? That's the one that film is famous for. It's famous for that, it's famous for that scene, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just gruesome stuff.
Can you check double check if I'm recording? I see a red dot.
I see the red dot, so it's okay. It might level kind of okay. Yeah.
I just wanted to share something with some studio audience. Sorry, I sound like a person from a US variety show. Yes, it's this thing. I actually emailed it to you. I don't know if you can see that. The PBS Idea channel. I just kind of fell into it yesterday because I think I had sent you one of their videos that dealt with the ethics of Call of Duty, I think. Was that?
Yes.
Yeah. And I think...
It's buying Call of Duty a moral choice.
Yeah, and the thing is, I think what that video was trying to say, and I haven't watched all of it, was that that because Call of Duty, the kind of computer game, is so realistic, that means that it's actually kind of wrong, because it's almost like you're owning a gun if you actually have Call of Duty, if you actually play it, and it's kind of like before you had super realistic computer games, things were more cartoony, so it was less. It was less grounded in reality. Maybe that's what I'm trying to say. The thing is, like, if you're trying to emulate reality, then it's almost like, what's the difference between playing a game and actually, doing the real thing? Like a kind of virtual reality scenario on steroids, almost.
I'm a Call of Duty guy. I play veteran in all of them. There's the new one coming out, which I posted for everyone on the Teams page. Yeah, and supposedly excellent game, but I'm not sure whether it will actually be available on Xbox One. They might be forcing everyone to buy the new, elite version of the Xbox that's actually playing it. But Call of Duty, it's actually a very graphic sort of game. But when playing it, you're in the game. But they actually created one of the games that I've got, or one of the series of it, is all the true stories from war veterans that were actually in that war.
Yeah.
And when you're playing the game, you don't actually realise. You don't get the full effect of thinking, if I was actually in that environment. You don't have press B, right, to reset. You basically gone. But that doesn't really come through in the game. And even when people, I've heard comments saying, "Oh, you let your children play that?" Yeah. Well, there's a complete divide between reality and this is just a computer game, right? Where if you put yourself in the mindset of the guys who are actually in that situation, it must have been Jesus, like horrific to see your friends getting shot and all this. Like war is just a nightmare.
But the thing is, if you play Call of Duty and it's kind of hyper realistic and it's becoming more hyper realistic with each different version, will we ever come to a version of Call of Duty that actually shocks people? You know what I mean? Like that you're like, as you reach a certain level, you're almost repulsed by the action, or kind of almost suffer shell shock. Oh yeah, the New Zealand shooting last year, that was strange. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, people have always said things like, and I think I may have posted something about moral panics on Teams and the Individual Ethics Club, that people always say something causes people to become criminals or commit violent acts. Yeah. So originally in the 1950s, people blamed comic books. So there was a huge moral panic about comic books, and there was a company called EC, which famously had a line of horror comics, and on one of the horror comics there was a picture once of a serial killer holding a woman's severed head in his hand, right, and there was kind of blood dripping from an axe, right? And this was the 1950s, remember, where everything was supposed to be speaking color, right? And there were Mexican outcries in videos at the time, right? And
it would have been a complete culture shock, like like really shake people around.
And people went to Congress. There was like the committee meetings in the U.S. Senate to try and regulate and control and kind of ban comic books, right? And in Washington D.C., one of the people actually, the politician, was kind of walking around with a copy of that. Oh, your audio is not clear. Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're starting to sort of like sound like you're not going to the toilet again.
No, I'm not. Let me try and do something. Let me try and tweak something. I'll try and increase.
You might have something running in the background on the laptop.
Let me see. I'll try
all the RMIT equipment that they provide you with. You should do like me. Go your own way.
I'll try and let me just try and.
While you're doing that, is if you go back to the Call of Duty. The Call of Duty, we can look at two sides. We can look at all the gruesome effects, and all the all the so-called, it influences people to go around, hacking people to death and so forth, right? Should your children play it and so forth? But on the other side, it's actually introducing a lot of new technology, right? And it's going through where it's influencing things like mechanized war, right? So we may in the future, right? People say wars and so forth, and you've got your utopic view where everybody says there shall never be a war ever again. We're all human, right? People don't get along with each other and so forth, and you can't enforce it. So somewhere along the line there must be another war, and when you talk between friends and so forth, they don't see it as a war between people. In real life, face-to-face, hand-to-hand combat, but they're talking now. Two people from two countries will sit there and battle it out on an Xbox, right? Or it'll be a team of people who are controlling mechanized robots or something, right? Or drones or something like that. So there's two sides to the games. Same as I'll divert. Same as movies, sci-fi movies, were instigators with so much new technology. It's almost not fun.
Can I adjust my levels? I'm just testing my levels. I boosted my microphone and did something with the background levels. Am I clearer? Testing 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, a little bit buzzier. So.
Buzzier? Oh, let me try and fix that. The buzzier.
Is it? There's nothing running in the background.
No. It's just that if it's buzzier, it's probably because I've done.
No, now you're okay. It's just.
No, went back to the normal levels. Okay. Oh yeah, now it's better. Okay.
You're
testing
okay.
1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3.
5, 4, 6, 7, 8.
5, 4, 6, 7, 8. I mean, I'm at 36 dB for microphone boost. I can't go any higher.
Yeah.
But
you're coming through okay now.
Yeah. Testing 1, 2, 3. Okay. Because you mentioned something interesting out there. You mentioned like in the future there might be global conflicts solved by people just playing computer games, right? And that reminds me of that movie, The Hunger Games. Where conflicts are solved in the future by people playing games in a sense. And here's me being a super geek, and I will bring this up in a second.
But going back to ethics. So. If you think on an ethical basis, different countries have different ethical standards. How do you if you think about wars and so forth, like the ethics involved within it, do you just throw all ethics and morals out the door, or when you're in a battle?
I bring up the ethics of global conflict. Right? So if and maybe students listen, this is important maybe for assignment 1, and I would like to think there's many different ethical frameworks, right? And maybe the 3 kind of most important ones, right? And ones that are kind of in fashion often, right, would be in Aristotle's virtue ethics. You're repeatedly, so it's character based, right? And there's all these different, qualities that a person should have to be a good person: honesty, so forth, courage, whatever. And then there's the Kantian approach, Immanuel Kant's approach, which is known as deontology, which is kind of duty based. Like what is my duty? That's based on tradition, rules, rights, etc. How should I act now? And I must kind of follow these patterns of behaviour, in terms of duties, rights and rules, etc. And then the third one is utilitarianism, which is purely kind of a focus on consequences. So you do something now because it's going to maximize the greater good for the greater number in the future. So only consequences matter. It's called consequentialism. And some people have kind of argued that in terms of utilitarianism, what you're really doing is trying to increase happiness for the most people in the future and minimize pain. So it's almost like a business-like approach to ethics, because you're trying to quantify ethics for everyone, and like maximizing profits, etc. So if you're looking at war, for example, right? I mean, the kind of deontological, the Kantian approach to war in the old times, I would say, what turn of the 20th century, immediately after World War I, the Geneva Convention, so a bunch of people got together in Europe, right, and almost came up with the rules of warfare, which kind of went through the window in World War II because of a person called Adolf Hitler,
Yeah.
So you can have countries that try to come up with codified rules for how to do just or fair warfare, but you only have to have one crazy megalomaniac to kind of tip that, on the side or right over, like Hitler did. The kind of utilitarian approach to ethics about consequences would be probably, in my opinion, the best example would be the decision to start the Manhattan Project in World War II to come up with the atomic bomb, which then I think it was Roosevelt signed the paper to kind of eventually allow it to be dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right? And the whole rationale behind that was the U.S. Military said, if we have a land-based invasion of Japan, there would have been at least 1 million U.S. casualties and umpteen more civilian casualties in Japan, etc. So based in terms of casualties, they said it was kind of the best option to do what they did, even though you still had a lot of people, innocent people in those cities who died, which is kind of embarrassing. And then kind of it led to, all the kind of hassles in terms of, people's issues with nuclear energy and so forth, etc., that kind of thing. And probably that's kind of one of the reasons why we don't have, a nuclear energy as being kind of like the kind of green alternative, as some people would say, to producing electricity, because our kind of memory of what happened at that time and how nuclear power can be misused. And even if you think about it, right, going back to the person that actually suggested to Roosevelt, right, that the US should actually create an atomic bomb, Einstein, he had misgivings, when he saw the outcome of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right? Then he became a kind of pacifist and almost like a philosopher. And even, Oppenheimer, the person that was kind of the scientific brains behind the Manhattan Project, he almost kind of had misgivings about what happened. In fact, I think he kind of quoted famously a line from the Bhagavad Gita, when they had the first test of the atomic bomb, I think in Los Alamos, Fruita, right? But it's a fascinating kind of thing to think about what these people did during the Manhattan Project, because it was more like, you had a bunch of the smartest people in the United States, the smartest people, ever lived, there in one kind of giant think tank to come up with this solution, And it was, the leadership was kind of interesting because you had two kind of opposing forces that were kind of titans of what they did. You had like a guy called General Groves, who was kind of like super duper US military, and then the other person, Oppenheimer, the kind of science guru of it, But yeah, so in other words, kind of the dropping of the atomic bomb was, I guess, in my opinion, a utilitarian act.
If Batman was in charge, it would never have been dropped.
Well, okay, you mentioned Batman, so you shouldn't do that because then I'll start reminiscing about those classic movies. What was the film? Maybe somebody in the audience can remind me. It was the one where the Batman movie where Batman has to make a choice. Is he going to actually save the woman that he loves, or is he going to actually save a whole bunch of other people? I'm not sure.
The trolley problem, right?
Yeah, it was almost interesting. I think. So I think that's the second Christopher Nolan. So the second, it was the second. It's the one with Two-Face. But yeah, it was essentially a trolley problem.
I haven't seen it yet.
See, it's something to watch, right? It should be prescribed viewing for this course. Anyway, what I've got up here, right, you're probably wondering, why is John doing this, right? This is an obscure film, 1970. It challenges a 1970 made for television film starring Darren McGavin, etc., that kind of thing. And the scene about this film, right, is that the premise is interesting, right? Because there it is. An American orbital weapons platform crashed in an uninhabited area in Pacific. An unnamed Asian country arrives first, but U.S. naval forces blocked their escape from the area. The platform would allow any country to threaten the U.S. from space. While the U.S. has an overwhelming advantage in force, the country is allied with China, which the U.S. does not want to aggravate. China's government does not want to enter a full-scale war, but neither do they want to lose face. They agree to settle the matter with a surrogate war fought by a single representative of each country. General Lewis Myers' post-proposal, so in other words, you get the drift. So in other words, rather than actually launching missiles at each other, China and the US, they decide to agree to pick the best warrior from each country. So the best warrior from the US is picked, and the best warrior from China, they're put on an island. They have to fight to the death. The one that survives wins, etc.
So it's not skilled, yeah. But when you think about modern day, you'd think it wouldn't be like brutal battle where they all kill each other, hack into each other. It'd be more, some kind of skill of intelligence or something.
But that notion also, and here's me being
another scenario. Hang on, Andrew's said something. Another scenario is when Coker put 2 bombs in tissue. Yes.
Oh, that was the one. Yeah, that was the one. Yeah. I think it was that one. Yeah. That must be the one.
Yeah. But because Batman is such a Kantian guy, he just follow the letter of the law. It really doesn't look at consequences much. I didn't actually see what happened. I know this.
But this was the other thing. I had the challenge up before, and here's me being full metal geek. In the original Star Trek series, there's an episode called Arena, as well, right? And in Arena, it's based on a short story by an American science fiction author called Fred Brown. To stop Earth and this other planet from having an all-out war that would cause massive repercussions in a particular section of the universe, another alien race decides to pluck Kirk and this other alien warrior, like a lizard man, puts them on a planet and does the fight to the death kind of thing. And the one that wins, their race survives, the other one, gets zapped, etc., that kind of thing,
I thought that was the very first episode where Kirk had to go around and actually create an explosive weapon by mixing, like powder and so forth, and chemicals he found along the ground into this tube. I thought that was the very first one.
No, that was the one. Yeah, I mean, you're actually remembering it correctly, because I think the rules of the battle in Arena was that, you only had to kind of use whatever was available on that planet to make weapons. And then Kirk uses his know-how to make that kind of, weird cannon or whatever, that kind of thing, make his own gun.
Battle between brains and brawn as well.
Yeah.
the ethics involved in there, the ethical part, was right at the end as well, and actually during it as well. Kirk, as far as I can remember, was always looking at being fair. He didn't want to cheat. And right at the end, he didn't actually kill the lizard guy, which if I remember correctly, they were wanting.
They became buddies. The lizard guy becomes buddies with Kirk.
Yeah, well, I don't think they did, but I'm fairly certain, if memory serves, because it's been a number of years, he didn't actually kill the lizard guy. And I think the lizard guy expected him to be killed. Expected himself to be killed.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly. Yeah, I might be wrong. Yeah.
First of all, I have to ask people, is there anybody here that isn't a member of the Digital Ethics Club? If you're not... somebody just turned up. You're called E.
Yeah. Yes. No, that was a while back. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, because normally I use this time to actually check to see who I need to add to.
But can I take you way back to the beginning of our discussion?
Yeah.
A friend of mine who was in the police force. He is actually in charge of the terrorist mob here in Melbourne. He had actually, to get into it, he had to complete a master's in terrorism. But anyway, Martin, I had a good discussion with him, and he said, I said to him, well, how do you actually fight terrorism if it actually eventuated here in Melbourne? And he said, it's almost impossible. This is quote unquote. It's almost impossible to fight someone with rules that doesn't follow rules.
Well, yeah. I mean,
the terrorists do not follow any rules. And when we actually discussed it a bit further, his image of a terrorist was someone who has no ethics, no morals, nothing. It's just I'm there to do what I need to do, and I don't care if I die doing it.
Well, actually, that reminds me of another movie, which is Godfather Part 2. Because I think in Godfather Part 2, there's a part of the film where it's actually set in Cuba right before the communist revolution, when Fidel Castro takes over, so Al Pacino, who's the Godfather at the time, right, he's going there to visit one of the casinos that kind of the mob or the mafia owns, right, and there's a roadblock, and there's some police, and they get some kind of communist terrorists and pull them out of this car, for example, and then they're kind of frisking them, right, and then one of them kind of manages to find a hand grenade somewhere, and then blows himself up, and one of the army or police officers, right, and then Al Pacino says, "Okay, that's it. We're actually, pulling our interests out of Cuba," because he articulates why. He says, if we're dealing with people who are willing to actually take their own life for a cause, we can't win. Because it's almost like, they're acting in a kind of irrational way. So
I'll go further. This is where I was leading to, was if you put that in a business sense, how do you as a business that follows law, legislation, policies, all that ethics within how every organisation has their own ethical standards. How do you do business with a business that doesn't follow any of that?
Well, this is why you need to have. This is why there's ethics or kind of morality, and then you have the law. So the law, in my opinion, has teeth. So even though sometimes the law is might be an ass or a donkey or stupid, etc., right? And that's because the law is based on language, and language is sometimes, easy to confuse or become complicated or contradictory, etc., that kind of thing. But still, if you have the law of the land, then the law has teeth, and you can punish people if they break a law. So, and with ethics, right? It's not kind of about that. It's more like thinking about or reflecting upon the difference between right and wrong, and internalizing it, and kind of realizing, why something is wrong or why something is right.
I'll hit you with two scenarios.
Yeah.
One, I'm not sure whether you remember whether I actually told the students and so forth, but one was where a friend of mine was selling a printer, and one of those, it's a printer which needs basically like a shed. It's a 7-color printer, which means it's actually a huge machine which creates like huge like printout posters, right? Like meters by meters by meters, big thing. He was selling it, and a Chinese mob said, we want it, but we want it shipped over so we can have a look at it, trial it, and so forth. So he spent, I think it was about in the 30s or 50,000, something like that, to actually strip this thing and ship it to them, right? In shipping containers. They had it for a number of months and shipped it back in pieces. It was completely stripped right down to those single washers and bolts, right? And it cost Pete another 30, 50, whatever thousand to actually put it all together to assemble it. And the Chinese guys said not interested, right? So it's cost Pete like 100,000 just for them to have a look at it, right?
Yeah.
Now, about a year later, the same printer, right, they actually created their own. So what they actually did was they actually copied the bloody thing, right, and made their own. And Pete said, well, I'm going to sue them. Right? And he couldn't sue them because they were internationally based. You couldn't touch any of the Chinese guys. And so he basically lost, like 100 grand or even more on that printer. So remember, you just said that the law is there, but the law is not always there.
Well, I mean that's because there's different laws in different countries, for example. And then,
how do you not fight, but how do you actually do business with people that have different, ethical, moral standards, policies, and so on? It's really difficult. It's like we have rules, and we have rules of war, but we go against the terrorists. They don't have any rules. So how do you fight that battle? So in business, I think it's a real catch-22. I'll give you the other scenario, and this is my own personal. And I'm not sure whether I've said it before as well, but dealing with Microsoft. So our organisation, my team, we said we're going to develop this application, but what we'd like to do is co-develop it with Microsoft. So we went through all the signing of non-disclosures, all that, so went right through that biz. 3 months later, Microsoft said, "Oh, we're not really interested." And guess what? It wouldn't have even been a year. Microsoft actually developed what we were discussing and started selling it. And we could not sue them. I went to our legal guys, and they said it would cost us so much money. Forget it. They weren't even interested in going into legal battle with Microsoft.
Yeah.
And again, see, how do you do business with someone who doesn't have the morals, the policy? Do you see what I'm saying?
But the thing is, it's more like you have to have an appreciation of different cultures. Like that saying, "When in Rome, do as the Romans do." For example, but it's more like we have to kind of understand how to deal with other people who are not like ourselves. And I
It'd be
think
interesting to see from the class, the students, how you would deal with it. Like, it would be interesting to see how the students would deal with it, and they will come across it when they start dealing in business. It's just signing non-disclosure doesn't mean squat, really. So, how would you deal with another company that you want to be in business with for a particular product or development? How would you deal with it? And actually, how will you deal with it? How would you cover yourself so you don't get ripped off?
that's like a risk factor of kind of doing business at a global level, because I think that you got to understand that all these ideas that we've been talking about in this course, like week 2 and 3, if you think about it, right, they're all really old ideas, right? I mean, like, some go back thousands of years, etc., right? And these ideas kind of have repeated over the centuries, for example. So if you look at it as, the kind of Confucian ethics of, respect for authority, cultivated mind, respect for parents, etc., the kind of respect for ritual, etc., that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then you've got, the kind of ancient Greece, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, kind of tension between rationality and emotion, virtue ethics, character-based, etc. Socrates, think, an unexamined life is not worth living, right? And then you have, the Roman Empire taking these things on and kind of bastardizing them as well, right? And kind of enslaving people through kind of, institutionalized, slavery and a kind of militaristic mindset, and being supreme engineers, etc. But also kind of introducing their own ideas to the world, right? And variations of Greek ideas like Stoicism, shit happens, dealing with problems in life in a kind of courageous way, right? And then if you go further ahead with history, right, when Christianity took hold, right, and that became kind of the dominant thought pattern in Western culture, right? Christianity took ideas from Plato and kind of Aristotle, like the notion of virtue ethics in particular, right? And that became like Christian morality, and that was the kind of dominant morality in the West, for a long time. But also there was a kind of hypocrisy, because that's the kind of ideal way to behave. And then there's also the kind of way that humans behave, human nature, which is sometimes animalistic, etc. But that's almost insulting animals, I think, sometimes, because humans can do really bad things, And the thing is, like, people have to have really an appreciation for all of that. You can't just kind of say, okay, I'm going to look at this now, right? That's why it's very, very important, right, that people are kind of educated. They have a kind of, general education about all these things. Otherwise, that they forget that often history repeats itself, right? And even for business, that's important, especially for business, right? Because sometimes you can be innovative, right? Not by just coming out with something brand new now, but kind of seeing what didn't work in the past, because maybe the past wasn't ready for it, dusting it off, and resurrecting that in the now, for example. And that's for products, philosophies, you name it, that kind of thing. I think it's important that people kind of know a lot of stuff. It's like, pardon me for being vulgar, it's like, before I said Stoicism was, shit happens, you could actually express it that way. Or people should know a lot of shit, for example, right? Because I think, that's how you actually kind of move things along, if you kind of have this kind of wisdom, for example, you can apply,
Is that why a lot of the industry now is basically requires some kind of accreditation almost in ethics?
Well, yeah, but I think the thing is, look, like I tell my colleagues at university, right? you've got to look at the companies in IT for what they're doing. It's truly innovative and almost in competition with us. You look at companies like Google, for example, and it's not just. I mean, look at Google. Look at Google. Think about it. It's a search engine company, right? Their creation was a screen with a slot. You put something in it, you press a button, and you can look for stuff. And now they're doing everything, right? I mean, not just, like unimaginable innovation from just something like that. And not just in competition with us. Somebody, was it you? I forget who told me that you can do no, somebody else, I think. They said that Google is offering accelerated courses in a variety of things, right? At a really, really cheap price, so you can do stuff that almost you can do at university level, right?
Yeah.
In a few months, right? And because Google can do that on steroids, because, they've got, platforms on top of platforms in terms of, how they do things software-wise, so they can deliver stuff in umpteen different innovative ways, right? And it's almost like Google is kind of impatient because, higher education is kind of sluggish, what they do.
Yeah.
It's almost like, Google, I'm sure Google would say this in the not too distant future.
Yeah.
People will probably say, I can't say Google too loud because I've actually activated Google Assistant on my smartphone. Now, I've noticed this. It's actually safer. Oh, look, thank you. See, this often happens, right? You guys can't hear me, but my Google Assistant on my smartphone can hear me, meters away, right? I mean, last week, I think it was, I may have mentioned Mussolini, right? And all of a sudden, Google Assistant, brings up articles on Mussolini for me, etc. I didn't ask for it from you, Google Assistant. I'm just making a comment. Going back to Google, right? I'm sure Google's going to get impatient and say, let's just come up with our own doctorate program. We can get we'll offer you a PhD, a Google PhD in umpteen things for a really cheap rate, etc. Because we want to actually accelerate innovation, because universities are sluggish, for example, which can be an exciting thing, but also a dangerous thing. Some people might say that, Google is still a company. It's an advertising company, right? So it's going to be, paying for all this or subsidizing this from a data that it sells and on-sells, etc., that kind of thing. And even though it may give you wonderful things, like, an MBA that you only pay like $200 for example, which could be 10 times better than an MBA from Harvard, but in exchange, you kind of enter into, like, you sell your digital soul, in a sense, for that.
I'm not sure. Like from my profession, when I was hiring staff, I would, if someone came in and, like, if I was there now, someone came in and said, "Look, I've got this PhD and masters from Google." I'd equate it to having a Microsoft certification as, like the sysadmin guy who knows how to use Microsoft Exchange or the Microsoft SQL server. I wouldn't see it the same. It would not be the same as a university degree. There's definitely. I would not.
I will show you something. Yeah. I found out the other day.
That's
I was listening to the wireless.
A full-blown degree. I really would.
I was listening to the wireless, and somebody who was a media personality was in lockdown. So, what are you doing now? And she said, I am doing this. I'm finishing. I'll bring it up.
It's something to do with the Google application.
The Alt MBA. So there's an American guy called Seth Godin, who's a kind of marketing guru. He's kind of like a self-made business tycoon, and he wrote several books, putting forward his theories in marketing, and made a name for himself. Yeah? But he's got like 2 degrees from Ivy League universities, and he was consulting for companies, right? And then he kind of made a name for himself, from these books that he wrote about. And then he decided to set up his own MBA program because he thought that Harvard and the other universities in America were doing a good job. And he first started doing the MBA classes in his office, I think, in Manhattan, and then he kind of slightly expanded. But a number of students that he has in this MBA program is still very, very small. And I'm not sure if it's probably cheaper than if you did an MBA at Stanford or Harvard, etc., that kind of thing. But it's it's called an alt MBA. And I'm trying to see alumni.
I immediately see it as an alternative to MBA.
Oh yeah, so in other words, right, I think that's a list of places in the world where students have actually done his alt MBA. So probably you don't necessarily have to do it sitting in his office. You could probably do it online. But it's more like you can then brag about it. Like this person could on the radio say, oh yeah, I'm doing an MBA. It'll take 4 weeks or something to finish off, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And of course, you might say, "Oh, that's rubbish," for example, right?
Yeah.
But it's more like, okay, you've got this network of people already, and maybe if these people then get executive positions somewhere, and somebody comes in with their CV and they say, "Oh, yeah, I've got an alt MBA, I've got one too," etc. You know what I mean? So you're forming a kind of base already
I just see it as a big alt MBA photocopier.
Well, no, but see that alt prefix is interesting, but because that comes from the world of IT, or particularly bulletin boards, because before you had the internet being a raging success, there were these things called bulletin boards, and people would start up kind of splinter discussions on bulletin boards and put alt in front of it, if they wanted to actually kind of diverge and fork from a kind of main discussion. So that kind of alt prefix is then stuck, so people then always use that if they want to define something as being an alternative, So for example,
all that, yeah.
Alt-right, etc. Correct. So alt-right, right? It's funny you should bring that alt-right, because I was looking for modern philosophical movements, right? And alt-right is actually like a political philosophy movement that actually started from a few philosophers that had kind of more extreme ideas, and they wrote stuff, and then it became this thing called alt-right. So it's almost like a modern version of, say, how the anarchy movement emerged from the ideas of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. So Jean-Jacques Rousseau is the Swiss-French philosopher that kind of co-created the social contract, and the contractarianism, right? Yeah. Is a kind of other ethical framework. So when people kind of enter into an agreement of how we should behave, in a organization, in a country, in a group, etc. That's a social contract, right? And then kind of there are different reasons for why social contracts should exist. So in other words, the Rousseau approach to a social contract is that civilization is a corrupting force, and you have to have a social contract to kind of keep people within a civilization on the straight and narrow. And Thomas Hobbes had the opposite. He thought people were born bad, and to stop people from kind of killing each other, harming each other, for example, you needed to have a social contract to regulate behaviour. And kind of the concept of social contract is something that happens all over the place, even though we're not kind of consciously aware of it. When we were physically at RMIT, for example, one social contract might be that lecturers have to wear pants when they're delivering classes. You just can't front off, not having pants to a class, for example, and not even shorts, for example, because that's not the way. And there's no sign anywhere that says, lecturers must wear trousers, right? But the assumption is you have to kind of be appropriately dressed, and that's because that's a given. That's like a social contract. You must wear clothing. Right now, for example, the social contract that is becoming in society in most places around this planet is wearing masks. So the thing is, and it's interesting because the wearing of masks is actually enforced by law. So if you don't wear a mask, you'll get a fine, right? But it's not like there's a law that says you must wear trousers,
Yeah.
I mean, like, if I was to walk down Burke Street, not wearing trousers, but still wearing underwear, mind you, that would be perfectly fine. I might just get looks from police, right? But they would probably come up to me and say, we're going to give you a $500 fine because you're not wearing trousers, right?
They just let you go because you've got a mask on.
Yeah, but mind you, if I was walking completely naked
Yes.
down Burke Street, that's different because there are kind of laws about, obscenity and stuff like that. So you can't do that, But it's not like, people are going to punish you because you don't have trousers or you don't wear shoes, That's where you have, kind of, and that's like almost like a common sense social contract. But if you go into some nightclubs or pubs, for example, there might be signs that say you have to have appropriate dress, for example, right? So an appropriate dress might be you can't wear thongs, for example, So if you, not a thong, but thongs on your feet. Because the thing is like, and there's probably a reason for, appropriate footwear. And it's not kind of, like aesthetics or whatever, but for safety reasons, because if you wear thongs and not proper shoes, maybe you might slip or something might fall on your foot, right? And then, you get injured that way. So that's why you have to have appropriate footwear in a pub or a nightclub, for example, right? So often there are kind of reasons for kind of a more institutionalized social contract for certain venues, but there's also the kind of, unwritten social contract, And that's the interesting thing with the wearing of masks now, because it's almost like through an act of parliament or a law, right? Now people have to wear an item of clothing on their face, and then, eventually it'll become just like second nature. So even if they remove the fine, probably there'll be a lot of people that will still be wearing masks. I mean, how many people do you think, right, will still be wearing masks, even when...
I think quite a few.
Yeah, even when it's not compulsory, quite a few, because people get used to it. It's more like, I didn't like it at first, right? But now it's quite comfortable, right? And I can, wear masks with different colours, etc., and that kind of thing, right? I mean, it's more like, okay, it's an imposition now. It might be uncomfortable, right? But eventually we get used to it, and I'm sure that's true with every item of clothing that is evolved into use by human beings. Once upon a time, right? People, if you look at old pictures of Melbourne, for example, 1940s and 50s, all the men that you see in the photos would be wearing hats, and not kind of like baseball caps, but like those fedoras made out of whatever material, is it rabbit fur or whatever fur hats are made of, right? Material hats are made of, right? And it was more like, then you have to ask the question, why did men wear hats, right? And it could have kind of religious connotations, because if you look at and maybe people in Australia in the 40s and 50s would have identified themselves as being Christian, for example. If they went to church, maybe at that time, the custom in what Christian churches were, people had to wear hats, that kind of thing. And then maybe people wore hats even when they were outside of churches, for example. Or it could be that people wore hats because, they wanted to, get the skin damage from UV, etc. But, or maybe it was just because everybody wore hats. High heels. Oh yeah. See, that's it. High heels are originally made for the butcher. See what I mean? So it's interesting to look. Thanks, Andrew, for that. It's interesting to look at the reasons for certain items of clothing, right? And how then people forgot why, people wear those items of clothing in the first place. For example, like ties, for example. Remember ties, right? Earlier, when you were working as a high-paid executive earning wheelbarrows full of cash, for example, right? Did you go to work every day wearing a tie?
Yes, must have, and a suitable tie. So it can't be something which is sort of like a Hawaiian style. And the other important thing was the higher you went up through the ranks, the better your tie knot would be tied.
That is interesting.
Yeah,
okay, so
if you saw a guy in a meeting and he had the old pensioner knot, the old throw, and you sort of angled sideways, yeah, well.
So
actually, it got to a stage in our cohort where some of the guys couldn't. They were not proficient in doing ties, right? So they would actually buy those. I think you know about them, the clip-ons.
Okay, were clip-ons acceptable?
Yeah, because half the time you couldn't see whether he actually did tie it or not. But the guys that really stood out were the guys with bow tie manually tied, right? Not a clip-on.
I'm trying to look up pensioner knot on ties. I think you just came up with something.
Sorry. Yeah, no, that was what we used to call it. I actually called that. I instigated that name. It was the pensioner knot. It was where you retired and you couldn't hear a stuff anymore, so you just throw it over 3 times.
Okay, we've witnessed something here. Ilya has just been totally innovative, right? There's no mention of this concept known as the pensioner knot anywhere on the internet.
Yeah.
Pensioner knot.
Yeah, don't look it up because it doesn't exist. It
doesn't exist.
Yeah.
See, this is creativity. This is absolute creativity. Pensioner knot. I'm impressed, Ilya.
And just to be a helpful hand to the students, if you are intending to wear a tie, I'd actually recommend it because at the moment the big groove thing is no ties, right?
Yes, exactly. Right.
It doesn't suit the older generation. So like the CEOs and so forth, they're still in the older generation. So this new influx of no tie, it's not a good thing. Yeah.
But apparently, the company, the biggest retailer that sold ties, I think Tie Rack, went out of business. Recently, let me see. I'm just trying to look it up.
Yeah, because the ties in business, I don't know who the hell it was, but he just decided no ties from now on.
Here it is. Yeah, Tie Rack. I think. Let me bring it up.
But once again, I'll bring it back to the ethical point of view. Most people would actually say the same as they would with the privacy stuff. Oh, but that's against the privacy. Yeah, but it's business, right? Once again, you'll actually get that influence from the top because they're old school. If you come in threatening old school, you're basically going to threaten that guy's view of you, right? And I don't care what his morals are and so forth. You have to try to, appease those morals, otherwise you don't get a promotion, right?
Yeah, but the thing is, morals or etiquette, or codes of conduct, as opposed to actual ethics. Remember, like last week we looked at some weird codes of conduct. I think there was one company, and I put the article link into the Digital Ethics Club. There's one company in that article that apparently in their code of conduct is they have naked Fridays, I think, once a month or something.
Yep.
Staff can turn up naked, right? And it's more like, yeah, but some people might find that uncomfortable. Even if they don't do it themselves, they might be uncomfortable being associated or working for a company that does that.
I'll give you an instance. I'll probably get my my ass kicked for it. But I'll be honest with you, I couldn't give a crap about what. But if you were interviewing a new staff member and they came in with this, the old like a UK or English style mohawk. You remember those like the real spiky, and it'd be either blue, pink, or yellow or something, right? And shaven on the side of the heads, right? And they came in for an interview. Would you hire them?
Well, I mean, aren't you hiring?
Morally speaking, if you're one of the people who sort of, oh yeah, everyone can be free, you can be anything you like, right? They would rip you to shreds for not hiring that person, right? But as a business owner, you can't hire that person because they will be your front or the face of the company, serving or getting business from people who are, the old style ties, that's it. So you just can't, right? Yeah. See, you don't wear dark clothes. Yeah, exactly right, Andrew. Yeah, but a lot of people are frightened of saying that, right? And it's the same as before. It's like, oh, you can't do that sort of attitude. Well, I can, and I did. You have to think of your business, your company, and not just your company, but your family in the business, right? So it's an image of the company. So if someone comes in with this huge mohawk spike, 2 foot above their head, shaving on the side and all that stuff, you just can't. You cannot hire them.
What's wrong with black and navy shirt?
Black and navy shirts, I'd actually say try and stay away from them.
Why?
If you're in a marketing side and you come in with a black shirt with a really like a $5,000 suit, it's impressive, right? But for a standard employee to come in with like a black shirt, if it's a t-shirt, it's fine, but as a black shirt, it does send negative connotations.
Oh, what about this article? I just said, not compulsory, but your partner would frown at you. Yes.
But good points. You guys are really coming up with some good points.
No, what about this question here?
Think of ramifications within a business.
No, what about this question here? This is from August 25th, right? Online career advice. It's been 5 months since pants died, but is the work from home dress code compromising productivity? The fact is that most people now are working from home, so maybe they're not wearing a 3-piece suit or whatever when they're working from home. And is that actually affecting productivity? Are people more productive if they do actually put on a uniform, like a suit, when they go to work?
We tried that within our business, right? It's because companies like Google, the very old ones, which is like Sausage Software and so forth, they started to liberalise everything, right? And what happened was within industry, everyone was saying, oh yes, you can wear jeans, t-shirts, singlets, come in naked if you want to, right? And they kept thinking, because if we put pool tables in and table tennis tables in and so forth, it keeps the employee happy, right? Problem is productivity goes through the floor, right? Because everybody's so happy that they don't even do work; they just socialise all. So our MD Hashimoto came one day, and he said, anyone that comes in with t-shirts, shorts, or thongs, right, immediately to be sacked. So we never implemented. We had casual wear days, but it was not a full-on free party. You come here just to party. It was never that. It was always productivity for the customer. Frightening stuff, right?
Yeah, frightening stuff. Because I'm just looking at an article here on if you wear these colours on your video interview, it could cost you the job. And because now when people do job interviews, because they're in lockdown, it's going to be Zoom, Teams, etc., and that kind of thing. And so apparently there have been some studies done recently that say that certain colours and clothing types make people appear more authentic, trustworthy, and creative. So if you wear these colours, you may have more of a chance to get a job, And if you don't wear these colours, then you won't. So, well, if you want to look trustworthy, bright colours are not your friend. It's all about neutral colours. Bornstein also notes that lighter colours look better on video. 56% said they found a neutral colour to make the person look authentic, and 74% made them seem like an expert. Nearly 50% said neutral colours made the person seem trustworthy. Bright colours were only rated as making the person look 30% authentic, 36% trustworthy, and only 18% said they look like an expert. And if you really don't want to look like you know anything, wear a patterned top, as only 8% said that made the person look like an expert. So in other words, right? No, it's almost like people used to make this joke that Melbourne was the city where everybody wore black. Black was the the kind of standard color for clothing in Melbourne, right? But then that kind of makes sense. If you wear black, it's going to make you look more trustworthy, even creative in a sense. Because like Steve Jobs, he was famous for those black skivvies that he used to wear, right? And it was almost like a parody. Other people that want to kind of mimic Jobs would put on a black skivvy.
I did.
You wore them, but that's only because you're after it so long.
I still have them, and I actually wore them last year and so forth, because you can't buy them. I had stacked away some Nike. One of the students actually came to me and says, "Oh, isn't he cute? He has one of those polo necks."
Is it a polo shirt or a skivvy? I'm not sure what you call it.
No, it's a polo neck.
Polo neck, yeah.
It's a full-on top.
I'm still on polo neck, yeah, because they're quite warm for the neck. If you've got,
yeah. But just to explain to you, actually I lost my thought a little bit. But on that dressing sense, for interviews, it's really important for interviews because. The first impression, physical impression you get with someone is when you actually introduce yourself in the interview. Yeah. So the first 5-10 seconds, right, is already this mental picture of what you are by what you dress, by how you dress. So I'll give you an example. It might sound sexist, but if a girl came in for an interview and she was there with like a male suit on, the whole panel would just say it's power dressing, right? Yeah. So it actually comes across negative, right? Okay. And because of the power thing, you'll probably find that if she gets the job, on your first negotiation, she won't get as much pay. Because the panel will come across more aggressive for the pay, the initial pay level. Yeah. And conversely, the other side, if a guy comes in, if a male comes in, and he's sort of like on the more casual side, right? That's also power dressing. It's almost like saying, look at me, I'm a hero. I'm so good. I don't even have to present, nicely. So it's a big thing for interviews is how you actually dress, right? How you present. Well, I don't know. I hope it helped the students, but anyway.
I think the thing is, right, if you look at, say, private schools, for example, right, like here in Melbourne, for example, they're famous, for having school uniforms, right? And I think it's that. And I guess the rationale behind having a school uniform, right, is that word uniform. Everybody kind of looks the same. So then the focus is not on differences between individuals, but on the common thing that students have to do, which is kind of learn, engage in, education, for example, and not worry about kind of differences in appearance because everyone looks the same, And I think... the problem is that humans very easily get distracted. So, and one way
Yeah,
to get distracted, right, is by appearance. So everybody does look the same, then you can actually focus on the one thing. And then you can just kind of, get distracted by knowledge rather than, how you look, you know. Yeah. So
Can
again,
I suggest something for today's meeting?
sure.
Just now.
Yeah.
I've got open the assessment criteria for assignment 1.
Okay. Yeah.
Did you want to sort of like just go through a point form, just a brief explanation of what we want?
Which is that the rubric that you're looking at?
I've got it open here. Hang on.
Maybe you bring it up. Yeah.
Where are we?
I don't know if students realise, but I've been dribbling out hints.
Yes.
Assignment 1. So I know there's 2 hints that I've sent out already. And there's more to come, and I'll always be archiving those hints in the Digital Ethics Club so that students can have follow-up questions and then others can share, etc. Okay.
Just open up here, just to make sure. Can you hit me?
Oh yeah, okay. So I'll send my next hint out for social contract theory today.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well done. Good question.
Yeah.
But clarity of expression and the flow and logic, it's one of the marks. I'm not sure whether some students understand that what we want to do is not what we want is to actually say, is there a flow to your arguments? And your arguments have to be supported with references.
Oh, it's a given. I think the thing is, I always assume that people kind of know that if they're doing this course, it's part of a postgraduate program. So if you're a postgraduate student, then there's kind of higher level expectations than if you are an undergraduate. But even if you're an undergraduate, you probably still have to follow that academic tradition of when you kind of make a statement, you back it up with a reference, right? And I think the problem that I've always experienced is because we're kind of in an IT program, it's an MBIT degree. Traditionally, people that study IT may have an aversion or kind of be afraid or uncomfortable with doing material like we do in this course, because this course is almost, like a humanities course. Let's face it, it's about people. It's about, the human race, in terms of right and wrong. And some people might say, I didn't pay my money to do a humanities course because I want to learn about IT. But it's more like, well, if you just keep on learning about, here's the next compiler and the next platform, and you don't know the consequences or the ramifications of what you create, then you have bad stuff happening in the world. Right? And then people say, why can't we actually fix it, etc. And that's because you have techos that just think about tech things without worrying about the human side of things. So that's why it's important to actually consider the humanity of whatever you do. That's why, and in fact, a past student of this course that then kind of later went on to do a PhD, but kind of dropped out of PhD. That's another story. But I cornered her once and I said to her, what did you like about this course? If you did actually like it, don't tell me if you didn't like it. And she said, well, it was the humanities course that I never did, and I'm not sure if that was actually a compliment or an insult. It was more like, but it's more like, okay, yeah. But the thing is, that's because, and she kind of wanted to be a tech entrepreneur, but I think she kind of realized that maybe it's important to think about this kind of stuff, the kind of the consequences of technology or the effect of technology on people, because maybe that's also another way you can make money. Sorry, that's me being cynical, because it's not just you thinking about how is it going to maximize the greater good for the greater number, but also there's kind of side effects of that, because maybe it also makes companies more profitable, if they do things that are more ethical. Like, for example, the fashion now is on using the term ethical as a prefix, for a lot of products. So there's ethical coffee and ethical chocolate and ethical everything. So it's almost like another kind of category for what you actually sell as a product or a service. You stick ethical in front of it, right? And then maybe that's going to actually make people buy your product because it's different. Right? It's like when people say that their products are green. This is green IT or green whatever, right? That's going to appeal to the niche market that has environmental concerns, for example. Or if you think about food and drink, for example, as more like, oh, this is salt reduced, or has sugar free, for example, and people are diet conscious, for example. Right? So people make different decisions, right? That affect businesses based on kind of moral, ethical, and all kinds of choices. Okay. So what was it? Okay, actually, can you actually go up more in the document and show them the rubric, the marking rubric, because it should be there. I hope it's there, because if it's not, no, there's a sheet with a marking rubric.
That's why I didn't see it.
No, at the end of the document, at the end, forward, move it forward. Yeah. Click. Yeah. Forward. Stop. So one thing that students should kind of realize, right, and maybe the most cynical student would the first thing they would do is look at the a marking rubric, because it's more like, that's the price of things. How much is something worth, in terms of marks. Remember the discussion we were having yesterday, Ilya, that somebody said to you, a student is not going to do something until there's a mark assigned to it.
Yeah.
So even if it's more, what's your name, and the student might say, how many marks is that worth?
I'm not going to do it.
Anyway, if you look at any marking rubric for an assignment, right, you can tell what the kind of emphasis, right, is for the assignment. So let's look. The first point is, title, discussion, introduction. So maximum 2. The next one is written expression, a logical flow, attention. That's 4, so it's a little bit more. But the one with the biggest chunk is quality and depth of commentary regarding application of ethical theory. 6. Excellent. 6. Right? Oh yeah. If you want to, come up with your own title. That's fine. Yeah, you're encouraged to do that. Yeah. Because some people just put down things like, assignment 1, which is kind of try and be creative. We encourage that. So as you can see, because the maximum component of marks in the assignment is 6 for quality and depth of content regarding application of ethical theory ideas, that means that that's the focus really of this assignment. Right? And I think it kind of makes sense because you've just been looking at all these ethical ideas in weeks 2 and 3, and you want to have some way of exercising those, and that's what the focus is of this. So this assignment 1 is always kind of like forcing people then to go back into the week 2 and 3 section and at least find out how to do 1 or 2 or 3 ethical frameworks and kind of apply those in a scenario, right? So it's more like a testing ground for doing that. So that's what the kind of main purpose of this assignment is. And because you've only got 2,000 words to play around with, right? It's not like that, if you do like 6 ethical frameworks, John will give or Ilya will give us a better mark. No, it's more like you can't fit 6 ethical frameworks into 2,000 words, right? Without being really shallow. That's why, as I say, up to 3 ethical frameworks. You can do 1 ethical framework, 2 ethical frameworks. You can do 3 ethical frameworks, right? That's fine. Right? And the other thing is, sometimes in the past, what students have done is get psychology confused with ethical frameworks, right? Because they maybe think, I found an article that looks at some kind of psychological angle, right? Which is kind of okay if it was in addition to looking at it through an ethical framework. What I want to see in this assignment, right, is that students at least look at some of those ideas in the week 2 and 3 section. Utilitarianism, Kantian deontology, virtue ethics, stoicism, social contract theory, etc., that kind of thing, and try and think through those lenses in this assignment, right? And then maybe, you can cite a psychology book, paper, etc., but don't make that the focus, right? The focus here is on ethical theories and ideas, right? The other thing I want to point out is that, remember, in the week 2 and 3 section, there's also a little bit about Machiavellian ethics. So Niccolo Machiavelli was an Italian, political theorist, right, that wrote a book called The Prince, where he basically taught leaders how to forget to be ethical, to be strategic and kind of achieve their desired goals, because he kind of said that sometimes trying to be a good person always is a handicap, right? And this notion of kind of Machiavellian ethics is, I think, we discussed this earlier about business, the kind of win at all cost ethos of business, do whatever it takes to win, right, is Machiavellian ethics, in my opinion, right? So in other words, most businesses would have, by law, maybe even a code of conduct, code of ethics, etc., that kind of thing. But in order to succeed, sometimes they then break the rules. Right? That's Machiavellian ethics.
Well, you have to be tough in business.
Yeah, which is Stoicism as well. Stoicism is toughness, etc. But Machiavellian ethics is more like dog eat dog. Greed is good, etc. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
So in other words, yes. Oh, and maybe keep going up through the rubric. Just a little bit.
Can I just add?
Add as much as you like.
When we say, detailed background, doesn't mean that your background or your introduction is bigger than your actual analysis here.
Yeah. So kind of try and make that clear when you're talking about the background. So, for example, it could be that you have the background in the introduction, or you could have a separate section for the background, right? It's just that we want to see that you've actually tried to understand what the scenario is, in your opinion, kind of regurgitate it, in your own words, right? And I think by doing that, you're actually thinking about it more.
And why I mentioned previously about the referencing is a lot of students in the past have been introducing things and not referencing correctly. It's if you bring in a concept, so like even here, if I just pick up the scenario, if you pick up the scenario from the assignment, you have to reference it. Don't just talk about the scenario. Right? Like, where did the scenario come from? What's the detail in the scenario? So you have to reference it right then and there, not at the end of the document.
Well, for example, the reference would be, you look for, say, online news articles, right, about the GitHub initiative to ban master and slave. So there's lots of those. If you just have to go to Google News and type in GitHub ban on master and slave, and you'll get half a dozen articles, which you can then kind of read yourself. Pick whichever one you want to have as a reference point. Stick that reference in your
something which is relevant. Don't just talk about the scenario without actually referencing, hey, this is what happened out somewhere else on the planet. Right? So mention it.
And the other thing, maybe, and you probably agree with me, Ilya, is don't have any kind of preconceived bias. Just because there's some kind of things in the scenario that mention Black Lives Matter, I think, and Jordan Peterson, right? It doesn't mean that you have to instantly say Beatrice Yang is a bad person because she likes.
Be open-minded.
Or she Black Lives Matter is fantastic. Therefore, Beatrice, Yang is, for example, right? You have to just judge on what she does.
Yeah.
So in other words, the reason why I put in those, and I call them distress. Oh, I'm sorry, I found it. Discussing my
comments.
Well, I mean, but yeah, I guess you can do that, but probably you got to kind of be mindful of the word count. It's not like, Yeah, deontology is right and duty, correct. Yeah.
You're right, Andrew. Not
Yeah,
one point of view. Look at the different frameworks. So no, you're right on the ball. No, it's
yeah. I mean, one thing that I got a comment from a student once in the past for the course evaluation was more like, what's the point of ethics? Because it's more like if you look at it in different ways, right, through different frameworks, you often don't come up with an answer, right? So what's the point? But it's more like, but that's kind of, that is the point. The point is the whole point is to make you think in different ways.
Yeah.
If you just accept one thing, right, then maybe you're lucky and you accept something that is the correct thing, or maybe you're unlucky and you accept a fanatical point of view, for example, right? And things go pear-shaped, right? So even though often when you do these analyses through ethical frameworks, it's kind of contradictory, right? At least you're thinking about something, by doing these frameworks rather than just kind of accepting a point from a position of bias, for example, where you're not thinking, you're just making assumptions,
Fairly sure, Andrew, you're on the ball.
Yeah,
Basically, you're looking at the different angles or different views into the dilemma, right? And
yeah.
we're not expecting at the end, Kantianism is the right thing to do. No, you'll actually find that you'll have some kind of balanced view, and one might outweigh the other, may not. We're not looking at saying, no, utilitarianism is the way to go, right? It's for you to actually look at the different dilemmas, because you're going to do the same thing out in industry. You'll look at a situation, the management will say, oh, that product full of bugs, send it out to all the customers. But you can actually, from an ethical point of view, say, okay, what's the view from the company's point of view? What's the view for the customer's point of view? What about the government, right? And the dilemma's everywhere, right? So hopefully you'll see how complex it is when you get out in the industry. Yeah.
I think I'd like to.
Right,
Yeah,
Andrew.
Yep. You're doing good, Andrew.
Well done.
I make it so, as Jean-Luc Picard would say.
So I go down a little bit. The conclusion.
But I wanted to make a point. Like Dan Andrews, every day he gives his speech, right? But what I like to see Dan Andrews, the Victorian Premier, right, is actually provides some, a reference point for his pronouncements. Maybe if he cited an ethical framework, we have to do this, citizens of Victoria, because of utilitarianism or Kantian ethics, because of X, Y, Z, rather than just kind of saying, do this, full stop, etc., that kind of thing. Provide some kind of evidence or argument. I mean, that's what a lot of people kind of want, an explanation at least. To me, I mean, that's what we're doing here by doing this. We're explaining something. Often people crave an explanation for something, right? And it could be something really simple. Like once I was caught on a train journey to the city, and the train stopped between South Yarra railway station and Richmond, and we were there for, it must have been like 90 minutes, right? And the problem was, right, that it was at least half an hour before the driver actually said what was wrong. So we couldn't get out. It was more like, what's happening, etc., that kind of thing, right? And then I think there was eventually somebody that identified themselves as being off-duty police officer. They kind of said, calm down, etc., everything's okay, etc. It was about 45 minutes in, that kind of thing. So it's more like, if you give people reasons or explanations or something, right, it's a good thing, right? That's why the good old days of traveling in aircraft, for example, that's why pilots talk the way they do. We're experiencing some turbulence, and we're doing this, etc. It's not like you're going on a 13-hour flight and nobody says anything, and all of a sudden weird crap happens, right? And the pilot doesn't say anything, right? Because aircraft travel, right, means that you have the person in control that's trying to persuade people about how to, feel on a kind of long haul journey, right, and give reasons for why things happen. So.
But I think you're on the ball. I think you're doing right.
On the ball, on the money, etc.
Yes, exactly.
On the money, on the ball, etc.
But with the marking scheme, I think
Yeah.
the other important thing was the conclusion section.
Okay, conclusion section, yeah.
Conclusion section should summarise what you've actually discussed above. Right?
Yeah, yeah.
Some of the conclusions I've received in the previous semesters were, everything's honky dory, that sort of thing. But you haven't mentioned anything. You're supposed to summarise what you've actually discussed above. Right? Yeah. So
Well, like, for example, you could even have a table. I mean, nobody's ever done that before, but maybe have a table or something, right, that kind of summarizes things, right?
But remember, it's only 2 marks. Right?
Yeah, but the thing is also new material not covered before this section should not be featured there. So a conclusion is not a place where you actually introduce new concepts, new arguments, right? So a conclusion is a synthesis. It's not where you kind of say, oh yeah, I forgot to put something else, I'll stick it here. You know, remember it's only 2 marks, right? And even the next one is kind of what I find interesting, right? Quantitative personal reflection section, right?
Reading this one for students really open.
The personal reflection section, right, is my kind of innovation to make sure that I bypass cheating mails. Unfortunately, there are places on the internet where people can buy ready-made assignments, right? The thing about a personal reflection section is it's supposed to come from your soul, emotion, feeling, right? It's not like you can actually buy that from a cheating mail. Please tell me what my soul would say about this assignment. It's easy to tell when people are actually not being sincere. So
what there is the and the most interesting one. 90% of the students put in not a reflection of what the course has said, but their personal experience.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I associate this scenario with blah, right? And it's just fantastic stuff. Some people really open up and say, "Oh, yeah, I had this problem at work, and it was exactly the same as this."
Yeah. And that's the kind of goal that we look for when you actually read assignments, something that's actually interesting. And what we don't want to see, right, is somebody that puts any references into a personal reflection section. Because it's always like, oh no, Immanuel Kant said this and the date, etc. No, it's a personal reflection section, right? What do you think? Not what Immanuel Kant thinks, right? I mean, look into your own soul, that kind of thing, if you're angry, even if you hate doing this assignment, I wouldn't mind actually having somebody have an argument about that in their personal reflection section. But people kind of never want to do that because it's more like, oh, well, if I say that, I'm actually exposing my true feelings, and it may actually downgrade.
Don't care in this course.
Yeah, it's more like
couldn't care. If you will not offend us, put it that way.
Well, for example, it's like if I mean the focus, I guess, on this assignment as well in the scenario, right, is always like issues of political correctness going crazy, for example. So it's more like GitHub says master and slave are associated with the memory of slavery. Let's ban these names, and then somebody arcs up about this, but your own personal experience might be, I don't know, maybe you've played a game or read a book that has references to slavery in it, and then you might kind of reflect on that, and you might kind of think, well, should I feel guilty because I played this game about slavery or the Roman Empire or something like that?
You're not going to offend anyone.
Oh no, I kind of
yeah. The last part is about which was important was the Harvard style.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, the Wikipedia articles, right? I mean, see, the thing is, okay, let me let you into a little secret about Wikipedia, right? In reality, this is how Wikipedia works, right? Most people become instant experts with Wikipedia. So Wikipedia is good for, like, if you're in when bars or nightclubs were open and you have an argument with a mate, right? And you try to settle the argument, you go to Wikipedia, right?
Yeah.
But Wikipedia is not something that you want to kind of, bet your house on, for example, because it could be could have some errors in it for certain articles, for example, even though maybe it's pretty good for a lot of things, right? But what I usually use Wikipedia for, and my colleagues, my esteemed colleagues use Wikipedia for, is once again to become an instant expert, and then you find a proper reference. So Wikipedia is the first place that you go to become an instant expert about everything, and then you find depth elsewhere. And where do you find depth? In like books or journal articles. So when the library was physically open, right, I would normally always be harassing students saying, go to the library and look at a book, right? And they would say, but I don't want to look at books because it's so like 20th century, right? And you're 21st century and everything's digital. And it's like, oh, well, now we're in lockdown. Everything is digital, right? So now what I've actually done is in the week 2 and 3 learning materials folder, I've got a pretty largish collection of books, ebooks. If you click on that link, you go on the library site, you can actually look at the entire volume online. Right? So please feel free to use those as references for things like this, or your learning journal, or the video that you have to do for assignment 3. That's where you can go, or you can go anywhere else in Google Scholar, for example, and look for stuff. So what I would do is this. How we use a reference, right? So in other words, if you want to do ethical analysis, it might be okay. I will press John, and then I will talk about utilitarianism, but I'll spend half a page trying to define what utilitarianism is, right? No, you don't have to do that, right? Because I'm not looking for tutorial content about ethical frameworks. It's more like a quick definition and a reference to something, and then you use it. So show that you know by how you use. So you don't have to kind of teach us or try to explain the difference between act and rule-based utilitarianism, right?
You've been
use it.
to get that many times, and people just regurgitate what we did in the notes. We already know what utilitarianism is.
Well, not only that, but the many times that I've read people trying to explain Kant's categorical imperative. So Kant's categorical imperative is really kind of difficult. But also, the big mistake they have is first they don't actually define what Kant's categorical imperative is, right? Yeah. Which is kind of like a novice mistake, right? Even for a novice, because I think the first thing, if I was a novice and I'm, facing something that I don't know, I would define it so I understand it myself, and then I share my definition. So categorical imperative means blah blah blah, and a reference, and then how do I use that? And that's how you would approach it in something like this. So always kind of just define something very quickly, but don't spend a lot of time, expanding on the definition, right? And don't spend a lot of time kind of talking about the biography of, philosophers. Like Immanuel Kant was a great philosopher, and he liked to smoke and, drink whiskey and stuff like that, and whatever, and that kind of thing. No, just, the thing is, like you say, Kantian deontology is about, an ethical framework where, the duty is the most important thing, in framing, making decisions about right versus wrong, and a reference, right? So the thing about a reference, right, is once again, it's not just to impress us. I will impress John and Ilya by putting references. No, references are meant to help you first, right? So in other words, you look at a reference if you don't understand something, right? So if you don't understand what utilitarianism is, right, from whatever notes we've provided for you, then you get depth and flesh it out by looking at the many, many books that deal with utilitarianism. So I've tried to put a kind of sampling of references there, right? So if you go into them, right, you then look, oh yeah, I'll see the contents page, I'll see the index, look up utilitarianism, I'll find out a little bit more about utilitarianism there, and then I'll use that as a reference. That's what referencing is for. Yeah.
I like when students actually put some of those additional news references in. I go off and I have a look just to see what additional stuff that we've missed. Some students come up with really good website, not articles, but news sort of, or not podcasts. What would you call it? Just a blog, right? With some ideas. I really like it.
And I also like the stuff that we've learned just by doing this every week, because in the past, we've discovered a lot of things. Remember the last thing that we discovered last semester? that student that mentioned that Elon Musk named his child after some weird mathematical formula.
Gamma or something, yeah.
Yeah, and then that really incensed you even more. It made you hate Elon even more.
Yeah. I never knew. It's weird.
It's all like, it's cementing a bad reputation, the feeling that you had about Elon. Anyway, I think the last thing, right, is overall presentation of written work. So the thing is, a lot of students kind of so don't realize how important the look of something is, and that's important, I think, in life in general, particularly if you're applying for a job or even doing reports when you're actually working in business, for example. The look of something, right, is almost as important as the content of it.
Like we said before, it's the 5 seconds before the interview. But even before then, it's when you actually hand in your resume with cover letter. Already the person's got a picture of what you look like because of your presentation, and that presentation is you. Right? So if you get that written on a piece of toilet paper, you're basically saying, "I'm only worth toilet paper."
I'll ask you a question. If somebody did actually send in a cover letter written on a piece of toilet paper, what would the person have to do to stand out, to not be
to be honest with you, right? I would love to just call them in for an interview, just to see who the hell put this in, right? But the problem is, it costs you thousands of dollars to actually interview each of the candidates. So I couldn't do it.
The best responses I had when I was applying for jobs was when I actually handwrote the cover letter, right? And I wouldn't just handwrite the cover letter, I would print it, because I had this neat printing style, right? And I remember people would often make comments, that is really the neatest printing style, that I've ever seen.
You've just hit, I was just about to say, the worst application I ever received, and usually the HR group filters out. Like 90% of the people are filtered out by HR. We don't even see 90% of the resumes, but this one came through and said, "You must see this." And I opened it up, and it was handwritten, like it was like a, I don't know, high school kid. And this was the all-time clincher. It actually had liquid paper, right? Mistake. I couldn't believe it. And that's for a professional position. For a professional position, I just could not believe it. Anyway.
I better tell the students, once upon a time, there was a substance called liquid paper. So liquid paper was kind of alcohol based, so people would often sniff it, and that's probably one of the reasons why it was actually banned or discontinued.
Handwritten with liquid paper to correct the mistakes. I couldn't.
No, but while on the subject of liquid paper and correcting mistakes, right? I did a talk about Stephen Hawking a couple of years ago. Hawking passed away, right? Because I was doing this thing called designer monologues. You know what designer monologues is, student stand up. It's more like a monthly kind of discussion where I kind of gas bag about things. So we were talking about Stephen Hawking, right? And I actually downloaded Stephen Hawking's PhD thesis because Cambridge University had made it available. And I was going through it just to show people his style, right? And Hawking, when he submitted his thesis, right, he made mistakes, right, on several pages, right? And he didn't bother, just retyping or telling the person who did it to retype it. He just crossed out the mistakes. So half a page, there were several pages with just lines through text, and that was it, right? So don't read that because I put a line through it, and it still got passed. And he became Stephen Hawking. See what I mean? So, and I just wanted, and even the referencing style was crap, right? And he didn't have a reference section at the end, right? And he had references at the end of each chapter and all kinds of, strange things, right? And it got passed, and he still became a legend, So strange things happen in the world.
Awesome. The content must have been brilliant.
Well, that's it. I mean, the thing is, he's Stephen Hawking, right? Remember that film? Was it what's that? Theory of Everything, I think, right? Where they show Hawking at his examination. You know, like at RMIT College of Business, they have milestones. You know, Ilya is familiar with the concept of milestones, where you have to make a presentation to a panel of three learned academics, and they make a judgment, right? So in this movie about Hawking's life, Hawking gives a talk, right, and then three people just say, fantastic, so you've proven that there's a black hole at the center of the universe. Thank you, Dr. Hawking. And it's almost like they give him the degree straight away.
Immediately.
It's not as easy as that in real life.
Can I add one more thing?
Add something, yeah.
There's a word count, but don't be pedantic where it must be exactly that word count. If you've got a flow and you feel comfortable, just go over the word count. Doesn't really matter. It just gives you an idea of roughly where you should be. That's all.
Oh, and a few other things, right? Don't put table of contents at the start,
no,
because some people, or executive summary, right? A few people do that, and it's more like it's only 2,000 words long. I mean, it's like really short, right? You don't need table of contents and executive summary for that.
Introductory is just introductory, just a few sentences. Does not have to be half a page, right?
Oh, and the other thing in terms of presentation, right, is try and make it easy to read, right? Because it's probably easy for you to write if you make it easy to read, right? And it's easier for us to mark. And by easy to read, I would say short paragraphs. So maybe like 5 to 6 lines per paragraph. But once again, it's not like a hard and fast limit. The rule for a paragraph is a paragraph in any text should be about one concept. So you chunk it in that way, and to make the paragraphs kind of easier to read, that's where you have to tweak the line spacing, because sometimes if you do like double spacing and you have paragraphing, it still looks kind of big. If you kind of maybe 1.5, I think, for line spacing, right? And that way, it's easier to see the chunked paragraphs, right? And also, if you have sections, where you kind of do ethical analysis, put subheadings, like say it's social contract analysis or Kantian analysis, that kind of thing. So you chunk it in that way. And if you want to kind of emphasize certain aspects, right, you're talking about deontology in a paragraph, you might want to make it in bold or italics. So once again, it stands out, that kind of thing. So, I think.
But we don't need the definitions and explanation of what utilitarianism and all that is, right?
Yeah. I mean, like for some, and I haven't actually sent this out as a hint for utilitarianism, but utilitarianism is about. Well, did I send it? I think I may have sent it out. Utilitarianism. You say it's more like another way you can actually express a utilitarian argument. It's almost like a table, right? Because greater good for the greater number. So it's more like have a table which has the stakeholders and what are the harms and benefits for all the stakeholders, right? And then who actually kind of wins? Do the harms trump the benefits, or do the benefits trump the harms, etc.
I'll be interested to see if any of the students actually do pick up from all of these video sessions. Saying, as discussed in week.
You reference us? Okay. Now the thing is, if you're doing that,
one student.
Yeah. If you're doing that, students, right? Remember, they keep on updating Harvard style. So if you Google Harvard style, I think you can go to the RMIT document, right? But we're not kind of really that pedantic, as long as it's Harvard style. I mean, some of them might say, does it have to be Harvard RMIT or Harvard, right? And it's more like Harvard, which is kind of also date, etc. But most places where they have a list of, how to do Harvard referencing, constantly update how Harvard style evolves, because, there's even a Harvard way to say tweets, because people cite tweets, actual tweets, not live tweets like in our course. If you go to Twitter and somebody says something in Twitter online, how would you actually cite that? Believe it or not, there's a Harvard way to do that, right? And also, there's ways to cite videos and YouTube videos and film and TV programs and all kinds of things. So just find a guide on Harvard referencing to assist in that. And I think that probably then, since this is a video that you're watching now, if you cite us now, right, then it would be using the Harvard style for a video, I think.
Yep. But be interesting. I've only about one.
Sorry, I thought you were highlighting that because I stuffed up the date. Monday, 7th September 2020. That's right. Yes. So, okay. Oh, wow. You got plenty of time. Next week is a non-teaching week. So in between going water skiing and, going to, no, you can't because we're all in lockdown. So I forgot, right? We're trapped, right? So since the non-teaching week next week, right, that means you've got plenty of time to do this amongst other things because there's very little distraction, yeah.
And just because we're nearly finishing up, remember we wanted to just announce saying there will be some changes to the workshops as well. So we'll need some of your participation during those workshops to do some activities.
Yeah, we were just discussing this the other day, and kind of Ilya thought that maybe it might be cool, and maybe I kind of agreed with him, right? That what we should have is maybe something like a debate. I think I've taught ethics at other places, right? And I think in one other place that I taught it, right, every semester they would have a week where they would have something called a great debate, and people would have to kind of within the class, discuss some points and kind of be for or against. So I don't know if that would be something that the students would find cool or threatening. I don't know. But we thought it would be kind of interesting because, it would be fun to find out what you think about certain things that we would put forward as the focus of the debate, right? And then maybe you would kind of in the process discover something because you kind of be forced to take a particular position, because if you're doing the debate kind of format, sometimes you might have to argue a point that you don't agree with, and that way you kind of learn something about yourself as well. Can you bring up that page about Twine? Website on Twine? Remember the thing? I just wanted to, before we leave.
Where was it here? No. Yep. No. Yep. Here. What's it doing to me?
So this is, I'm seeing it now. I don't know if everybody's seeing it, but
why is it giving
no, it's okay. You're there. Twine is an open source tool for telling interactive, non-linear stories. You don't need to write any code to create a simple story with Twine, but you can extend your stories with variables, conditional logic, just CSS and JavaScript when you read. So in other words, I just came across this the other day because I think a new book's been released, like a how-to guide to Twine. Right? And I did a bit of digging, and I think the Twine company is getting some seed funding to expand. But it looks kind of interesting. It looks like a platform for actually, as it says, creating interactive non-linear stories. So some people in the Twine community are using it to create games, but I thought it might be something that some people might like to experiment with to actually craft interactive non-linear scenarios. In terms of digital ethics, for example, so it's another way to actually make the learning of ethics fun. I think see if and we can kind of see if we can get victims, volunteers, to maybe participate in some kind of a proof of concept, project to kind of work on coming up with something, with a digital ethics flavor. In the Twine space,
tutorials to come. Expect to be able to do one of these. Yeah.
Well, first we have to actually learn it ourselves. But I would kind of, I mean, like Ilya's a genius when it comes to programming. I mean, like everybody says, Ilya can code himself out of everything, It's more like, oh yeah, how does time work? Don't worry, John. Give me half an hour, and I'll come back with X, Y, Z, right, etc. That kind of thing. Right? So, but the thing about the concept of twine, about non-linear interactive storytelling, is not new. It's been around for a few decades now. Because some people would argue that maybe, in a sense, a lot of the internet is interactive and non-linear, and it contains stories. But in particular, this is more like a kind of platform, so people can create their own stories, which then can be like games. Imagine a game on digital ethics, for example, that you can develop with something like Twine. Perhaps we can make it so, etc. That kind of thing. So, yes.
Your main thing on the books at the moment is your assessment. Make sure you've actually attempted and done what we've actually just explained.
Yeah, exactly. So don't play around with Twine until you actually submit something.
Don't do things. Do the things you have to do before the things you want to do.
Yeah. And once you do assignment one, then it's like, yippee! I can do anything I like until assignment 3. And the learning journal entries and whatever, that kind of thing, and the live tweets, etc. Yeah.
So, are there any questions from anyone before we wrap up? Remember, you guys, the teams page for the club. Remember, have a look at those because we're posting up interesting items.
Yeah. In particular from Ilya. Ilya's got like some super controversial items that he's put up because he wants to actually incite, discussion, etc.
I want to see whether I can touch a nerve. And someone says,
Ilya always says to me, right, should I put this up, John, because it may trigger somebody? It's what I think, I dare you to trigger somebody. I look for the day. Somebody
is successful if someone actually gets me sacked out of RMIT. It means I have. Yes. And I've got someone's mind. Yes.
Is that your outcome? That's your consequence.
That's right. Yeah, I think when I retire, doing all this stuff, trying to put back to the community, I think that'll be my final flag. Will be someone will chop me at the knees. And, yeah.
But going back to this Twine thing very quickly before we fold, this is an example of open source software development. So later in this course, we actually touch upon open source software development as being a kind of almost like an ethical movement. Like software development for the greater good. Because in a sense, with products like these, right, you don't pay for it. It's kind of free, but not free as in free beer, right? If you want to actually use it, and you become an expert in it, then you can and maybe should actually make it better. Add stuff to it to improve its functionality for others. And then, pay it forward, as they say, share it with others, spread the love.
Yep, correct.
Yeah. And it makes the whole world a better place. So, no questions. So everybody's asleep, like we are, So we're just sleep talking now. So anyway, thank you, Ilya, lowercase guy.
Yep.
And thank you, studio audience.
Yep. See you later, Andrew.
Student audience.
Excellent.
Cheers. See you in.
Oh, don't forget to stop recording, John.
Okay, stop recording. Sorry, I'll clap. That's the end. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.